Hi, and welcome to the Chris van Allsburg Museum. Today we are going to be talking and viewing several book exhibits over this author, Chris van Allsburg. But before we do a viewing of his works, we're going to talk a little bit about our author and illustrator. So Chris van Allsburg was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan on June 18, 1949. He's the second child of Doris and Richard van Allsburg. He went to junior and senior high school in East Grand Rapids. He didn't take art classes during this time. His interests and talents when he was younger seemed to be more in the area of math and science. Because of the high level of academic achievement at East Grand Rapids High School, and because each year a number of students chose to go to the University of Michigan, they sent an admissions officer to Chris's high school. The admissions officer would interview students and admit them on the spot if their grades and test scores satisfied the school's requirements. Which leads to why we have a picture of a Norman Rockwell painting in our museum. It relates to Chris van Allsburg's story on how he was admitted to the University of Michigan. So this is how his story goes. He says that I sat in a waiting area in the guidance counselor's office with an admission form. Before I finished filling it out, I was called in to see the man from the university. I entered an office and handed him my form and took a seat. He looked it over and noticed I had not chosen a college with the university. That is, I had not indicated what I intended to study when I got to the university. I had asked to see the form, and, like looking over a menu, noticed a listing for College of A&D, and asked the man what that was. He explained that was the College of Architecture and Design, which includes the art school. It had never crossed my mind that someone could go to college and make art. I hadn't taken any art in high school, but I liked to draw, and it occurred to me that studying art could be a lot of fun. I told the admissions officer that art school sounded interesting. Perhaps I'd give that a try. This was in 1967, the last year that the university admitted art students without a portfolio, which is a sample of their artwork, which meant that the admissions officer could simply admit me if he was satisfied with my test scores and high school transcript. Unfortunately, my transcript showed that I had not taken any art in the last 4 years. The admissions man pointed that out and said I was not qualified to enter the art school. I was 17 at the time, and like a lot of 17-year-olds, I like to try to outsmart adults. So I told the admissions man that because my artistic skills were so advanced, I studied art privately on Saturdays rather than take high school classes. I told him I've been studying privately for some years and was currently doing oil painting. None of this was true. He seemed to be impressed, but not entirely convinced. He asked me what I thought of Norman Rockwell. I knew that some people didn't like Norman Rockwell, a famous painter, illustrator who did magazine covers. I wasn't sure if the admissions man was measuring my sophistication, in which case I'd have to answer that I didn't think much of Rockwell, or if he was measuring my values. I didn't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I was pretty sure the admissions man did. I guessed that he was probably a fan of Mr. Rockwell, so I told him something like, I believe Norman Rockwell is unfairly criticized for being sentimental. I think he is a wonderful painter who captures America's longings, America's dreams, and presents American life with the drama and sensitivity of a great playwright. The admissions man pounded his fist on the table and said, Boy, you are absolutely right. He signed my papers, and I became, that day, an official art student. So Chris van Allsburg went to the University of Michigan in the fall of 1967. He majored in sculpture at the University of Michigan, where he learned bronze castings, wood carvings, resin molding, and other techniques. He graduated in 1972 and went to graduate school at the Rhode Island School of Design to continue his study of sculpture. He married Lisa Morrison, whom he had met at the University of Michigan. Lisa was also an art student who had studied education and had become an elementary school art teacher in the Providence school system. It was his wife, Lisa, that actually got him started in children's books. So now let's take some time and we're going to look at some of our book exhibits here in the Chris Van Allsburg Museum. Our first book that we are going to be looking at is called The Garden of Abdul Ghazali. Now, with this book, I'm going to give a brief description of each book, and then along with if the book had won any awards. So sometimes that very thin line between illusion and reality is not as clearly defined as we would like it to be. It certainly wasn't the day that Alan Mitz stumbled in the garden of Abdul Ghazali, for in this bizarre and eerie place, where strange topiary trees loomed, the evil visage of Ghazali casts its shadow. And even after Alan escaped, the spell of Ghazali still seemed to penetrate into his everyday world. In this extraordinary, unusual, and unique book, it explores both the real and surreal worlds with incredible deftness. In this book, Chris Van Allsburg created exquisite and beautiful images that will continue to stay with the reader after they have finished the book. So if we look through, now remember Chris Van Allsburg not only wrote his books, but he also illustrated them. So I'll just flip through a couple pages so we can get an idea of this novel. Alright. This book has won, Chris Van Allsburg, through this book, has won the ALA Notable Children's Book. He's won Caldecott Honor Award in 1980. He won the Hornbook Fanfare Selection. This book has won the Reading Rainbow Review, the Boston Globe Horn Book Award, and the New York Times Best Illustrated Children's Book. On to our next exhibit, which of course is the infamous book Jumanji. Jumanji is a book about Peter and Judy, who find the game Jumanji with the instructions that once the game is started, it must be finished or it will go on forever. And a little over 30 years ago, when this book came out, it has the same wonderment as it does today. This book is actually has a 30-year edition that comes along with a reading from an actor in the movie Jumanji, Robin Williams, and he goes through and he reads each page of the book aloud. Through this book, Chris Van Allsburg has won the School Library Journal's Best Book of the Year, the ALA Notable Children's Book, Hornbook Fanfare Selection, the IRA CBC Children's Choice, the Reading Rainbow Review Book. It won a Caldecott Medal. It is a winner of the New York Times Best Illustrated Children's. Book List Editor's Choice NYPL Greatest Children's Book Pick in 2013. So, that takes us to our next exhibit, which is Ben's Dream. Now, Ben's Dream takes place on a rainy day in which a boy is reading his geography book when he falls asleep. And in Ben's dream, he and his house float by the monuments of the world, which are half submerged in flood water. Look through. The one thing about this book that is different from other books of Chris Van Allsburg's is that there are not that many pages with text. If we look, we have a couple pages in the beginning with text, and then as Ben falls asleep, in his dream we lose the text. And we follow through the course of Ben's dream just through black and white illustrations until we get to the end, which brings us by Mount Rushmore. And we finally get our first real piece of text when it looks like Mount Rushmore is telling Ben to awake. And then our last two pages also finish with text. Our next book that we are going to look at is The Wreck of the Cipher. Now, in this 1983 book, Chris Van Allsburg first invited readers to peer over the edge of a cliff to consider the wreck of a small boat. Had a churning sea carried the cipher up in a storm? Could waves ever have been so impossibly high? And what of the boy who had believed, dared to chase the wind, no matter where it led? Now, 30 years later, the winds have shifted once again, and you're invited back into the world, or back to the wrecked Zephyr, to hear the story of the boy and his obsession to become the world's greatest sailor, in a storm that carried them to a place where the boat sailed on the wind instead of the water. It's told in a spare text and haunting full-color pastels. Chris Van Allsburg's spectral sailboats take on impossible flight. And it is said that the illustrations in this book are so vivid that one can feel the whisper of the wind and hear the flutter of the canvas. To depart this world for another, to entertain the marvelous possibility of dreams. So if we go through them, we're just going to flip through some of these pages so you can see some of this amazing artwork that goes along with this book. That is The Wreck of the Zephyr. Which leads us to our next book, which is one of the most famous books, The Polar Express, which was written in 1985. Of course, this book takes place on Christmas Eve many years ago, when a boy lies in bed listening hard for the bells of Santa's sleigh, which he has been told by a friend do not exist. Later that night he hears not bells, but a different sound. When he looks out his window, and is astounded to see a steam engine parked in front of his house. The conductor invites him to board the Polar Express, a train filled with children on their way to the North Pole. The train takes the children to the center of the city where Santa and the elves have gathered for the giving of the first gift of Christmas. And of course, we all know that the boy in the book is chosen to receive the first gift of Christmas, and he asks for one thing: a silver bell from Santa's sleigh. So Santa cuts the bell from his sleigh and gives the bell to the boy. And as we know, in the end, the boy receives the bell again under the Christmas tree after thinking that he has lost it, and to find out that his parents cannot hear the bell, but the bell could only be heard by those that still believed in the magic of Christmas. Now, this book, of course, has been made into an animated movie. The book itself has won several awards. It's won the ALA Notable Children's Book, the Hornbook Fanfare Selection, the Reading Rainbow Review Book. It is a winner of the Caldecott Medal. It is the New York Times Best Illustrated Children's Book and Booklist Editor's Choice. And I'm just going to go through real fast to flip through some of the pages of our book. And remember, all of these illustrations are done by Chris Van Allsburg himself. Alright, our next book that we're going to discuss in our museum is called The Stranger. Now, The Stranger first came out in 1986. The enigmatic origins of the stranger that Farmer Bailey hits with his truck and brings home to recuperate seem to have a mysterious relation to the weather. So, in this novel, there is the farmer, his name is Farmer Bailey, and one day driving with his truck, he hits something in the road, and when he gets out, it turns out to be a man. So he takes the man home to rest and recuperate, and brings in a doctor to examine the man, only to find out that the doctor believes that the man has amnesia and does not remember who he is. So the family takes him in, gives him clothes, shows him how to help out around the farm, and allows him to stay with hope that he'll remember who he is. As the book goes on, strange things happen with the weather. Where it was beginning to seem more like fall, it was now getting warmer again, and the trees were not changing colors, whereas everywhere else outside the farm had already changed to the fall orange colors. It then goes on to allude to, could the stranger be Jack Frost? This book won the Hornbook Fanfare Selection and the New York Times Best Illustrated Children's Book. Our next book that we are going to look at is The Z Was Zapped. Now, this book came out in 1987. It is a dramatic illustrations in black and white. And it goes through and presents the alphabet, in which mysterious things transform each letter. So as you go through the alphabet, it shows you a letter, and then it tells you what was happening to the letter on the next page. So we have the C, and then it says, the C was cut to ribbons. And so it goes on like this through each letter of the alphabet until we get to the very end. in which the Z was zapped. This book has also won awards. It has won the ALA Notable Children's Book and Book List Editor's Choice. Our next book that we are going to discuss in our museum exhibit today is Two Bad Ants. Two Bad Ants is a tale of two ants who decide to leave the safety of the others in their home and venture into the unknown, danger-laden kitchen. This book is about when an ant brings back something delicious that they had never seen before. The colony follows the ant to the delicious substance, and these two ants, in a moment of greed, decide that they are going to stay instead of go back. They decide, why leave when we can stay here and get all of this delicious stuff to ourselves, and we don't have to share, and we don't have to worry about walking all the way back. Unfortunately for them, their greed leads them to an experience of an awful day with dealing with the dangers of a kitchen. I'm just going to go through, we'll flip through some of these illustrations for you. Okay, and our next book that we are going to discuss is called Just a Dream. Now, Just a Dream is Chris Van Allsburg's eco-friendly, timeless picture book. It discusses a fantastic journey to the future that teaches one boy the importance of being good to his planet in the present. This would be an excellent book for our past Earth Day. It's about a boy who is all about TV and games and doesn't have time to do things like sort through his trash or pick out the recyclables or pick up after himself. He likes to litter a lot. And during his dream, just before his birthday, he wishes that he could go to the future where there are flying robots and things that can make things for him to make his life so much easier. In his dream, it actually takes him to the future of what would actually happen if he didn't change his ways and help the planet. Things are covered in trash. His old street gets covered in trash in the future. He wakes up and there is so much fog that you cannot see. They're cutting down all the trees for toothpicks. And it's just a world that has not been taken care of. That brings us to our next book, which is called The Widow's Broom. The Widow's Broom came out in 1992. This is a book about witches and how witches... It goes into the beginning of the book discussing how witches and their brooms work. In the beginning of the book, a witch's broom's magic seems to have disappeared, and a widow ends up saving the witch after she falls from the sky off of her broken broom. The witch then leaves and leaves behind what she thinks is the broken broom. The widow then comes to find that the broom is not broken and actually is able to learn skills that will help her around her own house. Her neighbors do not agree that the broom is helpful, especially the male neighbors, and they want to put an end to the broom. And when you read this book, you discover that the widow actually has a good trick that ends up helping her with the broom and dealing with her neighbors. This book has won the School Library Journal Best Book of the Year, the ALA Notable Children's Book, the Bulletin Blue Ribbon Book Award, the Horn Book Fanfare Selection, the IRA CBC Children's Choice, the Iowa's Children's Choice Award in 1997, and the Books List Editor's Choice. You can see again that we are back to black and white illustrations, which leads us to our last exhibit in our Chris Van Allsburg Museum. And our last exhibit covers the book Zathura. On our last page of our Caldecott winning award book Jumanji, we actually are introduced to young Danny Budwig and see him running after his brother Walter with the game Jumanji tucked under their arms. And it says that their mother states that they don't read the directions for things very well. So in this book, about 20 years after Jumanji, we actually find out what happens to Walter and his brother, who end up opening the game Jumanji, but realizing that it's an older game, decides not to play it. However, when he goes to put it back in the box, he discovers underneath the Jumanji board game lies another game called Zathura. Zathura is a game that ends up leading these boys battling for their lives in outer space. Zathura unleashes intergalactic challenges that require even the quarreling Budling brothers to work as a team. And in the end, the brothers, who normally fight and do not get along, come together, and the boys actually roll the dice, in which takes them back in time, takes one of the brothers back in time to before they discover the Jumanji board game outside. And he tells his brother to just put that down, we're going to stop fighting, and we're actually going to go play some catch. So those are all of our exhibits in our Chris Van Allsburg Museum. I hope you enjoyed looking at the exhibits today, and you have learned a lot about not only the author and illustrator Chris Van Allsburg, but also about his journey in becoming an author and illustrator, and about his children's novels, or children's books that he has written and illustrated. Have a great day.